And we are back. And the next thing that we're going to work on is we're going to work on driving our races down into our hub. So we're going to get our race driver sets out and see what we have to do to get these races driven home. So the first thing I'm going to do, first of all, is make sure my hands are absolutely spotless. Now the reason that it's important to have absolutely spotless hands is because if I have grains of dirt or sand or debris stuck in my gloves or stuck on my hands, and now I go to put a little grease in there and those sand grains or those dirt or debris is stuck in there, that's going to get into the bearing and limit its lifespan. So this needs to be very, very clean procedure here on this installation. It doesn't take a bunch of this. I'm just trying to put a little coat just to help this get started. Now this one is very close, but it's just a tiny bit too small. Now if I take this one, it goes over the entire thing and sets flush. So that's the one I'm actually going to use. And I'm going to make sure it's absolutely clean. I'm not even using my shop rags for this. I'm using my kitchen towel. So I'm sure the missus will be happy about that. All right, and we are right there. You want to make sure you're going straight all the way around. Let me get a little bit more of a BFH here. All right, it got started a little crooked, but I got it to straighten up. Yeah, that's looking nice now. You heard the sound change when it bottomed out? Yep. That's in there all the way around. And we're going to do our other one. And I don't know how much that grease matters, but it couldn't hurt. I think it's bigger hammer time. I need a little more on this side. You just gotta hit it. You can't be scared of it. I was being scared of it. I think we're all the way against our stop there. All right, our races are in. We have to put the rotor, the tone ring, the bearings, and the seals. And I believe the way I took it off is I did the seal before I took the rotor and tone ring off. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rotor and the tone ring back in, get it all put together, and then flip it over, drop that back bearing, and then put the seal in the back. Slide it on, and then put the front bearing in. So we are going to be just like this. But because of these screws right here in my wood, I'm going to lay this down first. I don't want to mess the new rotor up or hurt it in any way. So I'm going to lay this like this. And this is going to go just like that. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of blue Loctite on these as we install them. And we're going to be torquing these to 76 foot-pounds. I tell you what, guys, this video has been coming for a long time. This has been on my mind. This project I have been contemplating and thinking about in the back of my mind for several months. Just studying up on it, thinking about it, understanding the concepts of how everything goes together, reading about it, looking at my manual, and I really wanted to understand the concepts about how all these parts work together and go together so that I wouldn't have any hiccups once I got it installed. I'm just doing a little star pattern here, and I'm not torquing on them. Just using that to snug them up for me. I wasn't hitting the impact at all on that. These are going to be 76 foot-pounds. All right. And my plan is to do something like this. And see if we can get that to catch. And we're going to go across in a star pattern. And now for our tone ring. I tell you guys, so far this process, and my gosh, knock on wood somewhere, this process so far has gone off without a hitch. I'm really impressed. I mean, it's been fairly simple, and I know I should wait till I get it all back together before I say that. I could not find a torque value on these. I'm sure there is one, but I could not find it. I looked in my manual, my shop manual, and I mean, I don't know if I was in the wrong section or what. I probably was. This probably would have been more like in the ABS section instead of in the wheel hub section, but be careful, I'm using a 1/2 inch ratchet here. I think that's plenty. I have a tendency to over tighten, not under tighten, so I'm erring on the side of caution there. I did take a wire brush and clean up in between each one of the cogs here on the ABS wheel. I didn't want to over scrub it or grind on it or sand on it or anything like that because it's such a sensitive part of the hub, but I did clean it up and wire brush it a little and run some brake clean on it, make sure it was, each one of these cogs was nice and cleaned out around each side of it. So there we go. This thing's going back together like clockwork. Okay, next item on the agenda is the rear seal. And let me make sure first my hands are absolutely spotless. And make sure this is absolutely spotless. I guess what I'll do is I'll grease this back half of it from here back and grease all this in here and grease my rear bearing and put it in and put my seal, and then I'll probably grease the front half once I do the front side. That's what I'm going to do. Now, you want to make sure also, guys, you put your lid back on your grease. You know, if you hit something with an air tool and it blows dirt or debris in your grease and then that gets in your bearings, all those kind of things are just going to shorten the life of your bearing. So you go to all this trouble, you really want it to last. All right. And I almost ordered a bearing greaser, but how often am I going to use that? This works just as good. They've been doing this for years. So what we're going to do is we're just going to force that grease all the way up. Until it comes out the front. And you see there how it's coming out the front side? And also make sure you guys use grease that's designed for wheel bearings. You know, there's tons of different types of grease out there, and you don't really want to use anything because this is a high temperature environment, and you want to use grease that's designed for wheel bearings. That's one thing that's very, very important. You have to keep forcing that grease up there until it comes. And where I'm wanting it to come out is in between those two inner races right there, right into that little crack. That's where I want to see the grease come out from. And there you go. Now the next thing is we're going to put some grease down inside of our hub. And I had a lot of questions about how much grease to put down in here. And the thing that I heard the most is, of course, the manual calls for a gram level of grease, you know, that you actually pack in here. But most of the experts I talked to said just make it level with the race. So pack enough around the sides that it's level with your race, like so. And then we're just going to drop this in. Right there. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's a greased bearing. Now we're going to put our seal in. Just making sure I didn't forget anything. And I didn't. Seems to all be right. Now, it's also my habit to try to keep this spring in place in here, because if you're trying to drive this seal in and that spring pops out, it's a real pain. So it's always my habit to take just a little bit of grease and just make sure that it's going to hold my spring in place there. And you don't have to fill this thing up completely. You're just trying to touch it several places around the seal so that that spring will not pop out, because there's a little tiny spring inside there that goes all the way around. And you don't want that thing to pop out as you're driving it in, and many times that's what will happen. So we just put a little bit of grease in the bottom of it like so. Now there's no way for that spring to pop out. And then we're just going to set our seal right in there where it goes. And if you can get these to start just a little bit by hand, it's always better. Now I'm going to use my 74 millimeter seal driver, and we're just going to put that on. And what I'm doing there is I'm letting it hang over the edge. That way when I drive it like this, but of course that's exaggerated, and that way whenever I drive that down, it's going to stop whenever it hits flush. All right. I am pretty proud of that. And I'm actually going to use my kitchen towel, because I want to make absolutely sure I don't drop this thing in any dirt or anything. Okay, let's see. My tone ring is back on. My seal is on. My bearing is in. We're ready to put this thing back on almost. Put my lid back on my grease. All right, let me get another pair of gloves and we'll grease that other seal. And here we are back at the wheel. And I'm just going to take and clean this. Really good with some brake cleaner. Make sure I have a good mating surface for my seal. I'm also making sure that my threads for my hub are very clean, because that could affect the torque or the amount that it goes back on. If those threads are dirty or have crud in there, I could think I had more torque than what it really does. And I'm going to take just a very light coat of grease and put on this. There we go. And we're ready to go back on. Can't think of any reason not to. And there we go. Probably had a little bit too much grease in that one. Now the interesting thing about this nut is it says go to 22 pounds first. And in order to know that, we would need a torque wrench that has these two little, I guess they made one that had two little bars on it that stuck into these two wheels. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take these two screwdrivers, we're going to put them right in here, and as we spin this, we're going to say that that's about 22 pounds. And we are back. It is the next morning. I looked up last night and my memory card had gotten full, so my camera had shut down. It's pouring down rain outside, so I have my garage doors down to try to improve the sound. Hopefully it's not too echoey in here. I'll do my best in editing to try to improve my sound quality as much as possible. Now, I wanted to revisit this issue of tightening this axle nut. I was working on it last night, and that's when I realized my camera wasn't recording, so I called it a night, and we're back at it today. So, what the manual says to do is to tighten this up to 22 foot-pounds first. There's no way I can fit my torque wrench on here because this has just two holes here for studs. I'm sure they had some kind of special wrench for that. So what I've been using is this, and I have tightened this up to the point to where this is pulling. Now I'll show you guys at about it's about 6.5 pounds. So this needs to be loosened up just slightly to give me just a little bit less, drag on this bearing. So I'm going to see if I can just loosen it up slightly. All right, and let's see what that gives us. And that may have been a little too much. That's right at 3 pounds. So let me go just a little bit more snug with it. Right there. All right. Now let me check that and see what we've got there. And that's right at 4 pounds. Let me see if I can put just a tiniest bit of little bit of tightening on that. All right. All right, there's 4.5 pounds. So we're going to call that pretty good right there. Next thing we're going to do is we're just going to clean all this up really good. And I'm actually going to start with my tone ring in the back. And we're going to make sure we get this rotor very clean. Nice. And then I'm just going to clean up the front here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive this for a few weeks and then come back and double check the tightening of this axle nut and make sure that it's just right. Okay. Next, I'm going to put my lock washer back on. And the way that this works is you have these two keys in here that lock into the notches on the knuckle. And that prevents the axle nut from backing back out. Now this is going to go just like that. So you can see it didn't line up that way. And it doesn't quite line up that way, but it almost does. So what we're going to end up doing is just tapping this over just slightly. Right there. Now you guys can see how the hole in the lock washer lines up with the threads in the axle nut in order to lock this in place in all three locations. So what I ended up having to do was just take a little bit of slack off of that axle nut in order to line these three openings up. And that's the way the book says to do it. Now we're going to replace our 3 lock screws and we should be good. All right, I've decided to put just a little dab of Loctite onto these screws. Now I have grease in the opening, so I'm not sure how much this is going to make a difference. But these little tiny screws are all that holds this nut on here. So there's one. Two. And there we go. Okay, that completes everything down to the installation of my new Super Winch manual locking hubs. So I'm gonna get everything together to install those. We'll get the box out, I'll get all that set up, and we'll start on the next phase of this project.